Welcome to Meet Your Alderman, a podcast that aims to inform Chicago residents about the people who represent them. I'm Sarah Scott, newcomer to Chicago and wondering when beach season starts.
And I'm Eric Eber, a lifelong Chicagoan who's finally optimistic that summer is approaching, and is also worried that he just jinxed it all and doomed the city to even more winter. Anyway, we spoke to Alderman Andre Vasquez from the 40th Ward, which covers parts of Andersonville, Lincoln Square, Edgewater, Arcadia Terrace, Bowmanville, and Woodlawn Woods. Alderman Vasquez is a lifelong Chicagoan and has had a wide variety of experience in the city. From growing up in Bucktown and attending Chicago public schools to a brief stint as a rapper and a job in sales, he's relatively new to the Chicago politics scene as a first-term alderman.
But this doesn't mean he's shy about talking about his dreams for the future of Chicago. A self-proclaimed democratic socialist, he has big ideas about prioritizing community input surrounding infrastructure projects, creating community schools, and investing in eco-friendly transportation. More importantly, he isn't afraid to say his piece during city council meetings. We'll dive into those dynamics too during the episode.
This conversation was recorded on March 7th, which is a city holiday in Chicago known as Kazimierz Pulaski Day. So, quick side note, Kazimierz Pulaski was a Revolutionary War hero from Poland. Some cities with large Polish populations observe this holiday, such as Chicago. Alderperson Vasquez was kind enough to speak with us on his day off while he was out getting some car work done. That is why his audio quality might vary throughout the video, but it's pretty solid throughout. So where are you exactly?
So my old car broke down. So I'm switching a car radio from an old car to a new car. So I'm in the ward doing that.
Oh my God.
I'm very Pulaski Day today. On
Kazimierz Pulaski Day, and also one of the most, I would say, disappointing days in just weather-wise, right?
I mean, you know what it is? It's Chicago, so I kind of expected it. But yeah, you're right.
This is the kind of spring that I'm used to, the Chicago spring. You know, blustery, cloudy, wintry mix, all that kind of stuff. Like that's spring in Chicago. Anyway, I'm glad that you're able to join us.
Yeah, I think I'd heard about it, and I know when Maria was on. That's why I was kind of excited myself to be here and be able to kind of share insights from this position, especially in the times we're in. So. Oh
yeah, absolutely. And if you're ready, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Yeah, no problem.
So we'll just go right back, to the beginning. So can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? I understand you grew up in Bucktown.
So yeah, I was born and raised in Chicago. When people ask me where I'm from, it's kind of hard to tell them because I moved in 5 different neighborhoods growing up. So first it was Moffett and Damon. So Milwaukee, Damon area. Then we got priced out of there, then moved to North and Keeler. So we were in the west side of town. After that, it was like Belmont and Oakley, then Addison and Albany. I went to Lane Tech in 97 and ended up in the 40th Ward 10 years ago when I met my wife who grew up here. So I, mostly north side of town, but also west as well.
Okay. And so moving around a lot, I mean, were you priced out? Was your family priced out in most of those situations?
Yeah. My parents were immigrants from Guatemala. So I was first generation, and my dad was a shoe repair guy. My mom worked the night shift at an envelope factory. So we were poor. It was like me and my brother and my family in a 1-bedroom apartment. And rent would rise. And so we'd have to move every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I know that you said basically in the last 10 years, you've called the 40th Ward home. How do you feel the 40th Ward kind of is situated in the bigger landscape of Chicago? Like some of the key traits that really make it feel like home to you? Yeah,
absolutely. Had you asked me that 20 years ago when I was growing up, I would have thought 40th Ward was kind of the suburbs. I grew up more in the city, and as a rapper for 15 years, I kind of saw every part of town. But now that I'm grown and I've got family, it's beautiful here. It's Lincoln Square, Edgewater, Andersonville are the major neighborhoods people know. It's also one of the safest, if not the safest ward in town. And it's got the safest police district in the city as well. It's about as good as you can get in the city.
Wow. You mentioned rapping.
Yeah.
So can you go into a little more detail about your career in that area? And what was your name?
Yeah, so it used to be Prime. It's funny when you say career, I guess. I thought you guys were gonna ask me to rap.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, if you offer, right?
You guys are funny.
That'll be a first for our interview.
Well, yeah, I've only done it twice since I got elected. I've been very hesitant because I think people would be like, "Yo, we got this guy elected and he's out here recording albums. Like, what's the problem?"
That's all the reason he's alderman for. Yeah.
Yeah. We're under COVID. This guy's trying to get a
Yeah,
record deal.
right.
Like, it's not. Yeah, and I'm happy to talk about it. So, like I said, I'm an inner city Chicago city kid. So, my high school years when I was kind of awkward and building relationships, the kids who I hung out with were like the misfits at Lane Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the hip hop kids. So I went from a kid who used to write little poems to somebody who learned how to freestyle and battle rap. That was in the first televised national battle, which was the HBO Blaze battle. I toured nationally with a group called Atmosphere from Minnesota. I grew up and learned how to get in front of people and have a voice through my artistic expression. That being said, hip hop, has a lot of problems with toxic masculinity, homophobia, misogyny, and that wasn't foreign to the environment I was growing up in. So there were a lot of things that I had done and said when I was younger that I regret. And, I've been able to grow because of a lot of patient and cool friends and allies.
Yeah. And so just to kind of tie this up, so, you've got, I'll keep using the word career, right? Some pretty impressive feats as a rapper, moved around the city a lot, child of immigrants. So how does that all influenced your role as alderman today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's not lost on me how my experience is very Chicago in that manner of like really growing up here, going through the struggles of being a person of color in Chicago, of being like a Chicago hip hop person. All of that, experience and insight and perspective is what I bring to council. I'm also one of the few renters that are in the council. I think it's me and maybe one more alder. So when I think about, the opportunity to go in there and speak for people that have come from environments I came from that have been marginalized, that's very much at the core of the things that I work on and how I speak when I'm in council.
Great. So obviously you identify as a democratic socialist, and that was, part of the campaign platform that you ran on. We'd love to kind of give constituents and listeners just a better understanding of how you define a democratic socialist and how that kind of sets you apart in city council.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a good question to ask. People often have like a category that they picture when they say socialist. And what I ask them is, well, what does it mean to be a Democrat? Right? There's a spectrum. So for me, I grew up knowing that systemically there's a problem where there's an intentional way to keep people out and not have their voices heard. And a lot of times when you look at the problems we have in a society, somebody's making a profit off of it. So, when I became more politically involved, that never left because I grew up kind of a victim of that system. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about it now, it's about the ability for government to create a check and balance, because when you're thinking about how government works, those are tax dollars funding these services that should be going to those who need it the most. And that's clearly not been the case.
Yeah. So we definitely want to dig into a lot of your different policy ideas and proposals. Perhaps the first way to start is how have some of your proposals been received so far in city council? Like, can you think of some that have been received really well and others that you've received a lot of pushback on?
So I think because I also worked retail for so long, I did a lot of customer service. I don't really have a lot of things that get received not well, just because by nature how I present them, right? So I was part of the group that negotiated the civilian oversight of the police board ECPS legislation. And so coming from the environments I came from, I knew why we needed to have that accountability in place. And thankfully, we were able to have the conversation to move that forward, right? I've also moved forward gender identity legislation to make sure that city workers who are non-binary get the same respect they deserve.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned policing, and we definitely want to talk about that. So we actually spoke to Alderman Rodriguez a couple of weeks ago about CPAC, and this was just about the Civilian Police Accountability Council, that oversight over the police department. You yourself, you mentioned you were a supporter of CPAC. It passed into the council, which essentially created the new commission to oversee police misconduct cases. So can you tell us a little bit more about this new agency and your specific vision for it?
Yeah, so I definitely was a CPAC person coming in, and I also met the GAPA folks. So I was one of the folks who brought the two different groups together because I knew that if they hadn't built coalition, we weren't going to be able to pass it, right? So looking at what it can be going forward, it's like there's a top-down part and a bottom-up part when it comes to ECPS. The top-down would be the commission that helps write policy, and there's so much you can do there. when you think about how officers are being trained, how interactions are going, what needs to be accountability after interactions happen. So there's a lot there, but there's also the district counselors, which are elected seats that come up for election in February. And those folks will be on the ground in each district, looking at what's happening at the police districts and also making connections to communities. So our job, when we look at CPD historically and the problems that it has, it's in making it transparent, open, and accountable. And this gets us on that road. It's not going to solve everything, but it's a step that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, and I'm curious about the district councils. Again, we talked to Alderman Rodriguez about that specifically. So it's nice that they're so connected directly to constituents. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way I kind of read it was that they don't really have a whole lot of like direct authority or ability.
So there's potential for it. So I'm somebody who, because I was a police accountability person, actually became a civilian facilitator for CAPS before I got elected. And so what I got to see there is that the people who show up to CAPS meetings typically are the ones that have a lot of biases. And that needs to be changed in that room. So you need people there to kind of have authority and change there. But it's also being that close to what's happening when it comes to reporting, what's occurring. You can get information enough. So there's potential to do something there. It's just people haven't, right? People want to hold police accountable, don't often want to be in those spaces. And we need somebody with the courage enough to be there to be able to open things up for everyone else.
And when you say biases, which way is that bias leaning?
Sure. The first time I went to a CAPS meeting, I got to watch people ask the police why they weren't arresting homeless people. Or why are these kids hanging out on my block? Like, that's the part that I understood that I don't think we talk about enough, is that the police officers are reporting on calls made by people who have biases in the first place, right? So they're being told there's a danger and heading in that direction. And if we often talk about police, but not about the people who call, that put that implicit bias to start off with as well.
So do you think that the district councils or the heads of those councils can hopefully get people who are on the other side of that, the other side of that argument to come out and voice their opinions as well?
Yeah, that's what my hope is for it, from my experience being a facilitator there, that if you bring somebody in who also cares about public safety, who doesn't, we all want to be safe, but brings in people that have a different analysis, you can help change culture so we have a better understanding of how to address root causes and not just be reactive.
Yeah. And then another thing, like, I understand that you're very much oriented towards getting community insight, right? Getting the community involved. And you have this kind of interesting idea for getting the community involved when it comes to use of infrastructure funds. So as I understand it, again, each ward gets like 1.5 million to use for funds for infrastructure projects. And you've allocated 1 million of those to actually allow people to provide input on how to use those funds, mainly through an online system. So I'm curious, why did you decide to do that? How does that differ from other wards in the city? And what have the results been? How's the feedback?
Yeah, so when before I came to office, it was 1.3 million, and like no one got a say on what happened to those funds. It was just the alderman, Pat O'Connor at the time, who could pick and choose where that money was going. I was committed to changing that when I ran. So when we got into office, we created the People's Budget, which is a menu program that opens it up to the people so they can put forth ideas, be able to see where the funds are going, have the whole board vote on which ideas rise to the top and get supported. So we've grown engagement year over year, and it's been really cool to see. COVID kind of brought a lot of challenges, but also created opportunities in reaching people. So we got about over 2,000 folks who voted in the last cycle, and we're able to get park projects off the ground. We're able to get more pedestrianization happening. So it's been really powerful to see neighbors really wrap their head around how, like, oh, this is my government and our tax dollars, so we should have a say. And we're also doing that with human infrastructure grants. So we have another $100,000 that we're doing this year for open government efforts and art in the 40th ward.
Yeah, I saw your YouTube video about that. How's that been going?
We're the first in the city to do it. It's really like a pilot program. And what I'm trying to get groups and organizations to wrap their heads around is how they can help connect people to our ward office and really put initiatives and proposals towards that. So if somebody wants to have a digital team recording video to show people what a ward office does, that could get funded. If someone wants to help with communities that have language issues,